All right. Welcome,
All right.
everyone. Welcome, Sam Gilbey, to the Society of the Sacred Pixel. Sam, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Cool. Hey, everybody. Nice to sort of meet you all briefly. And yeah, I guess I'm just going to pop over to my presentation. Great. So, hi. My name's Sam Gilbey. What do I do? I drink coffee and I paint things. So, to sum me up, it's kind of this. Some of you are probably too young to know who Bob Ross was, but that's a whole other thing. But anyway, he would paint landscapes on TV in like a 20-minute window, and it was pretty awesome. Um, But by things, I mean mostly pop culture and often portraits. So this is like the kind of Venn diagram of what I do, where the kind of sweet spot for me is when I'm doing both pop culture and portraits. But equally, painting is my favorite thing. So if I'm doing client work that involves portraiture, that's fine. I'm happy with that. Sometimes when I've done some licensed artwork for like movies I love, such as E.T., it's not always been possible to use likeness of the actors and things. So that's actually over time opened up an interesting avenue for me, where initially it was kind of almost a frustrating thing, to be able to do a ET poster but not paint all the characters with their faces showing. But actually, I've enjoyed kind of exploring that. So here's a quick sort of overview. I know some of you have already seen some of my work, but this is kind of a quick snapshot of various things I've done over the last 2 to 3 years on average. My style is kind of, as you can see, painterly. Generally, I'm doing kind of observational work that's based on some kind of reference most of the time. I like to kind of take things that already exist, I suppose, and bring my painting style to it, and sort of hopefully it goes through my kind of lens, as it were, and create something new. So I love doing collage layouts. I love pop culture, but I also, it's been fun the last couple of years doing more sport related work and things like that. And I've been a gamer kind of my whole life. So all these kind of areas for me, they all kind of overlap. But yeah, typically I work digitally in Photoshop in my home studio, which is where I am now. I've moved the layout and it's kind of looking a bit actually better than this now. But this is kind of where I work. We built a studio in the garden basically during kind of COVID, so like five years ago, and it's been amazing to be able to have a space where I can come do what I do, but crucially be able to lock it and leave it and then go back into the house. So if I ever have to pop out in the evening to do a quick thing for a client, I can do that, but it's also kind of separate, and that has been a kind of game changer for me, like in terms of the workflow stuff. Sometimes I use Procreate on an iPad and occasionally even paper. So like these are some marker drawings I did a couple of years ago for a Comic Con. But my background is kind of in acrylics and like pencil drawing, and I did an A-level fine art degree. I later sort of went digital, as it were, but I always wanted to keep that kind of painterly style rather than going for something that only felt just digital, if that makes sense. Who have I painted things for? So these are many of the clients I've been lucky enough to work with. Obviously, it's nice to be able to make something like this, and these are all people I work for. But it's not as if this happened overnight. This is I'm now, I guess, sort of 20 years into being a freelancer. The first decade of that, I was doing some illustration work, but mostly being a graphic designer, web designer. And then it's the last 10 years where I've only been working as an artist. So there's some of the clients, and then what have I painted for those clients? These are kind of some of the franchises and properties and titles that I've worked on over the last kind of few years, making licensed prints and doing like social media work and that kind of thing. So what areas do I mostly work in? These are kind of the four main kind of strands of what I do. On one hand, I've got licensed prints where I work with companies that own a license for a movie or a series of movies. And then with that kind of work, it's like the typical way it works is you do a sketch, you send that to your client who then shares it with the licensor. They may or may not give you any notes or give you the go ahead. You then kind of make it, and then a few months later, it might be approved, and then you can sell it. basically. But those things that I'd love to do those, but there's a very long lead time on that. So it could be like kind of, really 6 months it might be before you're making anything from those. But through doing that, that kind of led to me doing some film packaging stuff. So getting to do, I guess, what I think of as really kind of mini posters, but doing packaging for Blu-ray releases, soundtracks, things like that. And then there's advertising work. So one thing that's come out of, I guess, me mostly doing kind of posters is that's led to like sometimes brands want to do a movie poster that isn't a movie poster. And I'll get more into that later. But, this has been a nice little avenue for me to explore. And obviously, these kind of projects very much help to pay the bills in ways that doing like a Blu-ray cover, even though I love it for like a 1980s kung fu movie, doesn't necessarily pay as well, let's just say. And then also editorial, that kind of is obviously, well, say obviously, unfortunately, in a market that's kind of shrunk very much the last few years, especially. But I've been lucky enough to do some things for like Empire Magazine, Entertainment Weekly, Hollywood Reporter, things like that. And I love to, do those kind of projects when I can. So that's the main areas I work in. How did I get started? So a long time ago in a galaxy that's not very far away, i.e. this one, I was basically a kid obsessed with pop culture. For some reason, I was only ever allowed to wear brown clothes. I don't know what that's about, but it was the late 70s. So, and I just grew up in the era of pop culture going massive with Star Wars. So for as long as I can remember, I was just kind of obsessed with, again, like seeing things that were just out there and kind of wanting to almost like trying to channel my excitement for it into drawing. And I, so for instance, I remember seeing this amazing Star Wars poster from Thomas William Chantrell back in the day and just sort of being blown away. It just felt like magic to me, like the way that the characters are in a collage. And in a way, if you look at it, it's kind of odd because like, say, C-3PO, R2-D2 and Chewbacca, if you didn't know that they were, kind of like human-sized characters, as it were, then they actually look like they could be really small here. But there's something about the montage and playing with scale and how that leads your eye around the image. I just remember staring at that for hours as a kid, and I feel like that kind of almost like this one image kind of set me off on that. Really sort of spoke to me. But yeah, I would just then carry on doing that same thing. So seeing things I liked and then trying to draw it, with better and worse results, like all the kind of pop culture stuff at the time through the 80s. Ghostbusters gave me nightmares for weeks, but I still absolutely loved it. From all of the kind of cool things about it, the logo, the production design. I mean, I'd like to think now that when I do portraits, I don't need to say like the name of the person next to it, but back then I kind of did. That Optimus Prime there, that's the first drawing I ever sold. Like I did a whole bunch of Transformers for like my school fete when I was, I guess, 6 or 7, and I did a whole bunch of Transformers as black and white drawings that we then, we photocopied them and they were sold to raise money for the school. So that was, my first taste, even though technically the school got all the money, but first taste of like selling artwork was quite fun. Spider-Man, my uncle gave me a load of Marvel comics, mostly with John Romita Sr.'s artwork on it. So that was a massive inspiration for me. And I think the way I've always drawn, like if you look at Spider-Man, like on the right there, he's obviously, he's looking quite junky. I think the way I would draw is like, I would never plan everything out roughly. I would kind of want to draw the webbing in detail. So I would just kind of do one chunk of one like strand of webbing at a time, and then I would get a very wide Spider-Man. So, but hey, it's all good fun. It's all part of learning. And then obviously as an 80s kid, you couldn't escape the amaze. I wouldn't have known who it was at the time, but later on kind of realizing who Dries Struycken was. And it's really sad, he obviously passed not too long ago. But for me, kind of the ultimate movie poster artist, and I do stare at his stuff for hours to this day, but they're so evocative and obviously have amazing likenesses, and he was fantastic. But yeah, many years later, it's been amazing to kind of like all that stuff I was drawing as a kid. Many years have passed. I just kind of kept doing that. I kept doing what I loved, and it's led to me being able to work on some of these properties I hate even using the word properties. There was things that I really loved, but Transformers, Ghostbusters, Star Wars, Spider-Man, to have drawn those officially, many years later really sort of means a lot. So a little later on, in my kind of when I was like 12, 13, I was reading things like discovering like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comics as opposed to kind of the cartoon, which were, was much, much darker and like just brilliant. Like I loved seeing all the line work in 2018, and like one of the coolest things was like if you did an ink drawing with like not so great like felt tips, then you would photocopy it. If I did an A3, photocopied it, shrunk it down to A4, everything would look so sharp, and I just kind of love that process. Also in the 80s, you can get away from ninjas. They were like everywhere in movies and video games, and it was kind of the coolest thing. So like, and then, we would spend a lot of time in the video store, and there'd be a lot of films that you couldn't, obviously you weren't old enough to rent them out, whatever, but you could still like look at the covers and all this stuff, was kind of, it would be inspiring me at the time. I'd love looking at like airbrushed, hand painted lettering that had a chrome effect, all that stuff. So no surprise, I started making my own comics, and it's like a cyborg ninja. So just combining all those ideas. But yeah, this is the kind of thing. So I would be always making stuff like, either writing stories, but I would write a story, but only really so I could draw the cover, and I'd kind of get bored writing the story and all that kind of thing. But yeah, I would like amuse myself a lot of the time with this. Um, the other thing was also the covers of video games. So video games themselves, like this was the amazing cover by Bob Wakeling, and then the actual game was like, as you see on the right. So covers were doing such a hard, an important job in those days to really feel much more, make you feel like the game was much more evocative than it really was going to be. But the thing I also loved was like, then there'd be a loading screen that someone had made to sort of like take the painter's work and try and translate that into pixel art in, much more limited palette, limited resolution. And I love seeing that, that transition. Then this was a game that I used to love. Like it was an arcade game that then came out on the Amiga, which was the computer that we had. This was then, Amiga was great. Like I was kind of jealous of my friends who had like a Sega Mega Drive or Genesis in the States, or Super Nintendo. But the Amiga did have this amazing package called Deluxe Paint. And that's where I actually first started doing my first digital work. So, again, like taking something that was already there, but doing my own kind of spin on it. I, even at that point, kind of loved trying to do the logo, trying to translate that myself into the pixels. It was great. All done with a mouse in those days, but it was good fun. So later still, then I did an A-level in fine art, and during that process, I discovered the work of David Hockney. I just loved all the scent. He was mostly using acrylics, which really appealed to me. I found oils kind of fussy and difficult, and I was kind of young and impetuous, and I guess like I just loved being able to go straight for acrylics where they dry so fast. So you really got to work at quite a pace, and you're not. It's much harder to kind of blend things, but in his work, I love the colors, the sort of the pastel tones, and then like the space he'd have between his pieces with two figures in them. So I was doing this kind of stuff for my A-level, where I'd be doing quite fairly large paintings, and just I would be, taking photography, taking photographs, and then working from those, or sometimes doing it from life, but very much trying to work in that vein. Then I did a degree at Keele University in visual arts and music, which is a whole other thing. But basically, this is where my kind of pop culture and what I was discovering about kind of like art history kind of came together. And I guess this is still something I'm exploring today to some extent. The idea of kind of parody, where I love all these different things, so putting them together is fun. So this was like taking a Van Gogh painting, and then kind of combining it with Metal Gear Solid, and it was all about self-portraits through art history. So putting myself in a video game, that's a whole other thing, but it's all to do with like in Renaissance times where they invented like the kind of 1 point perspective, and that was amazing. But you're still outside of the painting. But video games, which were sort of going 3D at the time, where suddenly you can be much more invested in a game. So the idea of like, I was kind of combining that with painting. Anyway, that was good fun. So how did I make how did making art become my job? So the fast version is quite slowly, but I won't bore you with the details. But I basically worked 5 years in-house at a local web design agency. Then I went freelance, and by going freelance, I say we're about an hour out of London. So I was be commuting into London, doing 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe the longest contract I would ever do would be like maybe 6 months, working on all sorts of websites for branding, all sorts of different campaigns, doing kind of UI. This was kind of before it was even known as UI or UX design, where we'd be just experimenting. A lot of it was kind of advertising related. So it would be like you'd be doing a campaign where it would only be up for like a few weeks. It was like you work on a game or something to get people to visit. And it was a really fun time where, you were encouraged to be as creative as possible because you were trying to make websites that, people would share with other people, kind of, pre-social media really, but it would still kind of, these things would still get seen. I enjoyed all that stuff, but I wanted to kind of become part of a community. And back in those days, again, pre Twitter or anything, there were these design news sites. Pixel Surgeon was one of them. There were several others where they'd have this little scrolling window of news. All the sites kind of had one of these where the contributors to the site would be able to log in and post links to the cool websites that were out there or illustrators they'd seen or whatever it might be. Pixel Surgeon I really loved because it was like a bit of a broader remit. It wasn't just illustration and design. We were like reviewing movies and games. So I got involved and started reviewing stuff. I became a music editor for them. And we would like work with like record labels like Ninja Tune. They would kind of, this was all like, we weren't paid, but we would get to go to gigs. We'd get to like interview some of the artists and we'd get the albums kind of early. So it was pretty cool. And then we'd also run competitions. So this was an early thing where I was kind of exploring different like styles where this would just be like a JPEG on the website, but it'd be kind of fun to just like look at the graphic design of the album and sort of do something that would echo that. So that you built up quite an interesting range of work quite quickly. Through that, some of my first commissions as like an artist were strangely, actually, I started, even though I was very much still learning all about this myself, I started doing magazine tutorials where they would want you to explain a new technique, or sometimes it would be Photoshop. This was probably based on Painter. And then you would go through your whole process of making a piece of artwork. It was a great way to, start to get paid. Through Pixel Surgeon, I got to interview Edgar Wright, which was amazing. I had a lovely chat with him. And when it finished, I was like, well, hey, so I said to his like agent, I've done this piece of fan art and I just wondered if he, might like to see it. And I never really expected to hear back. And in fact, Edgar then emailed me himself and said how much he loved it and could he have it like as a print. And obviously I was very happy to oblige. I think he's still got it in his office now, which is amazing, like 20 years later or more than. And he was very supportive. There was like the trade paperback comic. The cover's not my artwork, but he got it so that in the collected like official graphic novel, my artwork appeared on the inside back cover, which was, one of the first times my work had ever been like published or anything like that. So then it was amazing to have made a connection with Edgar. I would then like whenever he had something new out, I would sort of make some stuff for fun. It was great to know that, I could do this for my portfolio, but also I'd be able to show him. And then later on, I did some gallery exhibition pieces that were inspired by Spaced, which was the TV show that he did with Simon and Nick Frost and Jessica Hines before Shaun of the Dead. And then I worked with Edgar a little bit where I would do commissions for like events that he was putting on. So this was kind of like a little flyer I did, and they were just fun to do. And then he commissioned me to do something for Scott Pilgrim, which was used at the New Beverly in Los Angeles when they were doing midnight screenings. And then, like I say, like I often just, when he's got something new out, I'll often make something anyway. And he's got several of these like in his office or on canvases and things like that. And then amazingly, he then actually commissioned me to do some artwork for his Sparks documentary, Sparks Brothers, which came out, I guess, 2020. And this was super fun because it's kind of a bit of a joke in the film. Like they were kind of wanting to be the biggest band on earth. So he had this idea of like doing a kind of 1950s kind of epic style poster. So yeah, this is, you know, obviously the references here are very deliberate, but something between like Ben-Hur and El Cid. So it's really awesome making that lettering, and then that, you know, it's only seen for like, I don't know, half a second in the film, but it's amazing to actually have something in a movie. And then this led to the soundtrack was coming out from Waxwork Records. They ended up including the artwork as a little poster with it, which was cool. So yeah, one thing often leads to another. So like I say, this flyer that I did, this was attended by people in London who were running like Picture House cinemas. So I started to work for them, doing like they were doing screenings, and I would just do these little kind of mini posters that would be on the screen as people were coming in. So Big Lebowski, Planes, Trains. These were, you know, it's not client work. I mean, I was paid a little bit to do them, but these would be kind of put up as quad posters in the cinemas, and it was a really fun way to just be sort of experimenting with posters. We did all sorts of different ones over a few year period, and then that led to something else, which was like this was then those things were sort of done for a very small fee, but for fun. Then Picture House Cinemas put my artwork on a DVD for the first time. So I originally did the kind of poster as a commission, and then the director really loved it, and then she asked if that could be the DVD cover. So it was awesome to be able to go into like a, you know, a store like HMV here in the UK and actually see a DVD there on the shelves and see it on iTunes and things like that. So yeah, gradually I was getting paid to do what I love. This kind of bit I did for like the sort of London cinema scene led to me contributing to gallery shows in the States. So you've got Gallery 1988 and Hero Complex Gallery in Los Angeles. You've got Spoke Art in San Francisco and now New York. So there would often be like a theme of a director or even a genre, and you would pick something. So these were kind of like unofficial exhibitions, but there'd be like 40, 50 people contributing to the show. And I had this kind of pretty good, for about 5 years, I just was kind of non-stop on this, where every month and a half or so, there'd be like a new show coming out. So I'd be, you know, it was a really fun way to just like keep exploring ideas, keep trying things, and really build up my portfolio. And, you know, and sell a few prints along the way. So yeah, you know, just it was all good fun, really. I've done less of that recently, but what happened was, so most of those shows were kind of unofficial, but then sometimes they'd work with a license holder. So what happened was the Karate Kid piece that I did featuring just a Cobra Kai was like for an exhibition all about bad guys. So I just picked that as like a fun thing to do. And Sony got in touch like via the gallery, and they basically loved it, and they wanted to put it on a special edition of, you know, of the film. Now at the time, I must admit, I thought it was unusual that they were going to have a cover for like the Karate Kid without, you know, the Karate Kid and Mr. Miyagi. But equally, they were going to pay to use it, so I wasn't going to complain too much. But that was really cool to do that. And then I guess probably 4 or 5 years later, they actually then came back, and I finally got to kind of do the whole series justice, where they were bringing out the sort of the trilogy. So I got to do Daniel and Mr. Miyagi on the front, and then also cover, you know, the rest of the main characters on the back. So there's like the full. I love doing this. So obviously you got to think about your cover, your back cover, and then, you know, but it is effectively one landscape piece. I love like doing a collage of characters, because it's all about figuring out how to lead the viewer's eyes around the piece and not out of it, and working out the hierarchy of characters and where they should all be. And, you know, I just love putting all this stuff together, just to show you a little bit of process. Like, this is the kind of thing. So when you're working with a client, they are, you know, 9 times out of 10 going to know your work already. So I really don't mind sending a client something very rough like this, just where I'm like, okay, this is generally what I'm thinking of going in terms of a layout, because they've seen my finished stuff. So I'm not too worried about trying to show them, you know, like, oh, well, I know it looks rubbish now, but I know, you know, hopefully they know that I'm going to get to something much more detailed, and this is just the problem solving stage. But at this point, there's a lot of things that have been figured out. So like whether it's the fading from like the kind of reds and oranges on the left over to the calmer blues on the right, or many of the characters on that collage is kind of coming together, is starting to make sense. And then I can just iterate on it, get their go ahead at this point, and then I can iterate and then send an update when I'm a bit further along. Then this is like kind of in the middle would be like everyone's had like 80% of their painting done, but it's not quite kind of popping. It's not kind of coming together yet exactly. But I know I've kind of solved a lot of the problems. But I think in this one, like I ended up going for a different face for Daniel, and I've worked on the overall color grade as well, so that final image has got more warmth to it, where you can see it's like sort of colder and cooler in the middle. But yeah, that's just that evolution of like you just kind of keep going. Then through Spoke Art in San Francisco, they had this every year. They were doing what was called a Bad Dads exhibition, which is dedicated to the films of Wes Anderson. I think I started with the Life Aquatic one, and I gradually over a few years built up a series. Then by the time Isle of Dogs came out, Wes Anderson was then aware of the show and kind of very happy it was happening. So that became like an official piece. And then since then, I'm keeping that series going as and when I can. So I've done Rushmore and I've done Grand Budapest Hotel. Hopefully, do more. But there's a very sort of deliberate with these ones. They're deliberately very kind of flat, and it's obviously meant to be hopefully the way that Wes Anderson would compose a kind of collage layout, as it were. So I love doing them. This was this was through Gallery 1988. They had an official BoJack Horseman show. This was before I really, because obviously that's a cell shaded style in the series, and I didn't quite know how to approach it. Like, it was amazing to be invited. I thought the series was really good, but then basically watching it, I noticed that in, I think, season 1, behind his desk in his little office, he had this kind of like version of the David Hockney painting. So I was just like, oh yeah, that fine. It was like the kind of the moment of like, that's how I can like contribute to this. So on the left is obviously the Hockney, but it was fun to I've always liked, again, going back to that childhood thing, I like to kind of like sometimes obviously in this case I'm trying to get as close as possible to the original, but then it's just changing the little references and having the Easter eggs in there from the show. So that was super fun. So slight tangent alert. Basically that kind of parody and homage type work is something I love to do when a theme kind of really will work with something. So going for the Grant Wood American Gothic, it just was perfect for like a WandaVision piece. That was something I did for fun. I did a gallery show from the films of the director of Amelie, whose name, oh my gosh, it's escaped me now. Anyway, I'll move on while I think of that. Sorry. But yeah, this was really fun because it was like if you've seen the film, basically this painting comes up because someone is trying to recreate it and they keep failing. But I just thought it'd be really fun to kind of have a version where we swap all the characters from the Renoir painting for the characters in Amelie. Jean-Pierre Jeunet is the director, right? It came to me. So, and actually, yeah, he then ended up he actually has this as a print, which is awesome to have, done these things kind of, for fun, hoping to sell a few prints, but then to have been able to reach back to the person who made it, it is pretty awesome. This is the Mona Larry for Larry David, obviously. Just a simple thing, and just like he's always like staring people out and looking kind of grumpy. So just that kind of idea of like that ubiquitous gaze, and then changing the background to be a golf course. And then this is kind of the weirdest one I ever did, or the most like niche. I don't quite know where the idea came from, but anytime you can do a Star Wars parody, it's probably it's worth a go. But yeah, just kind of swapping this like not very good like 90s comedy for Star Wars characters. And the coolest thing, I mean, again, I'm so glad I did it because, Luke Skywalker himself, Mark Hamill, actually shared it, which was, that was a very, very happy day. I'm not going to lie. Now this is probably the best. It's the best idea I'll probably ever have. Just one of those ones that kind of popped in. And you never know when they're going to come. But I just, once that kind of came into my mind, I was like, I had to get that one down. And that's still, something I always have that as a little postcard at Comic Cons and stuff. And, it will often get a chuckle. So I've kind of just got to keep it there. I don't think I'll ever think of anything that's kind of works as well as that, but hey, it's nice to have thought of that. Oh yeah, so where was I? Right, so official posters for film and television. So out of the gallery show stuff, which is mostly unofficial, sometimes like BoJack that would be official. I got to work with like people who had licenses for things like Steven Spielberg films, and then these are both with, I think Scarface is Universal, Godfather is of course Paramount. This is just a weird one in the sense that when I did The Godfather, I couldn't include Al Pacino, although he is technically there on the wedding procession at the very bottom. And then obviously Scarface, you couldn't do Scarface without him. So it just really varies like what you're allowed to do from film to film. Something like Die Hard was one of those ones where I wasn't allowed to include Bruce Willis, but I really enjoyed finding a way to kind of have something that captured the film. Because obviously, whilst it's an action film, really what's so good about it is the fact that he's kind of in the shadows and like outwitting the terrorists, like sort of from there. So it was kind of fun to like to play it in that. And then something like The Warriors, that was an official print where I was able to include the whole gang. So it's all fun. It just depends what you are able to do. And then more recently, I've kind of done some work with Marvel. So prints for Moon Knight, Spider-Man into Spider-Verse. Then also with DC, Peacemaker and Batman. So again, with each one, going for the kind of the right color palette and the right mood is like part of the fun. And yeah, it's like tangent, just about making companion pieces. So I love to make pieces that kind of go together. So the Andor artwork was for Star Wars Celebration in London 2023, just when, Andor was kind of like the first season was kind of coming out and everyone was like cottoning on to how awesome it was. And then the year after I did the Rogue One piece to balance out in both pieces, they have the main characters as kids. So everything's kind of expanding out from there. And then working out, which characters are going to be in both and how's that all going to work together. I did a couple of prints for the Batman the Animated Series, and these are for like two of the kind of movies within that. But in both of these, like the idea is like the composition is kind of reflects and swaps over. And anything like that where I can explore that's super fun. These were some covers I did for Empire, and originally did season 1 on the left. But this is before we knew the character's name was Grogu, and it was all kind of a bit mysterious. And then by the time season 2 came around, we were pretty familiar with him. So then we're seeing his whole face. But, again, these just like very simple mechanic, but just like flipping them around. And then I got to do a set of Rocky prints. I stopped at Rocky 4, so it's like just his career. I mean, I'd love to do Rocky Balboa and maybe the Creed films, but just working on like a set of prints that could all go together. And you got the boxing ring kind of carries through all of them. This was an interesting licensing restriction where Carl Weathers, like Apollo, could only be properly on like Rocky 1 for some reason, like contractually. So I couldn't actually include him. So I had to work out a kind of system where it would work as a set, but you wouldn't notice so much. Now but his absence is kind of because really he should definitely be in Rocky 4, but because they're all designed as a set, everyone is from the saga is in there, if that makes sense. And then this was some editorial work for Entertainment Weekly, I think, getting to do like some romance covers for Sandra Bullock, because there's the film, what's it called, Lost City, from a couple of years ago, where she's playing like a writer and kind of she gets involved in like some adventure kind of through that. So this was just like looking back at her old stuff. So yeah, through the kind of bigger posters, that led to me doing quite a lot of work on physical media. As a lover of movies, it's been awesome to kind of, to do artwork that's officially associated with a movie, but on a much smaller scale than a poster. And so these are some of the things I've done in the last few years. Like I'm a big kung fu fan, so I've really loved doing that. It's been nice to, sometimes it's a film often it's a film you've not seen, or certainly one you've not seen for a while. So it's either fun to go back to it or discover it for the first time. There's a few more there, all different genres, family films, horror films, epic films, documentaries. It's all a way to explore it. And I should also say that with many of these, I'm also doing the typography. So this is like, whilst I only really work as an artist now, my kind of graphic design background is still in play, as it were, with some of this, and it could be just the case of, choosing a typeface, but it's often a bit more involved. I do some hand painting on it and things like that. So I love all that side of things, trying to work out, again, like what's the right genre, what's going to work with the artwork I'm doing. So that was just going back to soundtracks then. So in terms of physical media, so that the Sparks print, as I say, came with the Sparks Brothers vinyl. That was with Waxwork Records. They then kind of discovered my work, again, through Edgar, so I really have to thank him. I was then commissioned to make a set of trilogy pieces for the Fear Street films that came out on Netflix. And, the idea is there was 3 different eras, 3 movies. And these were all inspired by the book covers, many of which were by this brilliant artist called Bob Schmidt, which have a very specific look. It's very kind of airbrush, and they're very, but they really are excellently done. And I imagine, as far as I know, they're all done from some kind of reference, and they're great. So it was really fun trying to kind of channel that. They still had to feel like mine, but to kind of nod to those was great. And then that was for the vinyl. Then another company released the CDs. So a smaller package, but I got to do another 3 pieces. So I ended up with kind of set of 6, which, again, like anytime I can make a series, I love that. So yeah, I've also done a few t-shirts. There's a slight tangent. So different kind of process in a way. You're trying to work on something that just works as like a single image that's going to work on the color of the t-shirt, but they've been fun to do. And then from some of those other things, that's led to working on a much bigger scale. So I'm also represented by an agent. So Central Illustration Agency represent me. I'm also a member of a collective called the Poster Posse. But I've got to do, now this is just a mock-up. I think the actual billboard was actually technically on digital screens, but they kind of do these mock-ups to go with the work. But yeah, this was a really fun project where Channel 4 in the UK were basically wanting to kind of show how much they stand out. So Taskmaster is like a comedy show, but they were like where the guy's sitting on a throne, Greg Davis, and this was the idea of like standing out from all the other shows that are like, Game of Thrones or, in that kind of vein. And then we did a whole set. So I would be painting the main character, and then the job was to do a series of kind of clones of other shows that would, make them stand out. So that would, this was really fun. And then in that same year, 2023, I got to do artwork for Glastonbury. So this was for the BBC iPlayer, where they were going to promote the coverage. I got to do Arctic Monkeys, Elton John, and Guns N' Roses, which was, all really exciting to do. And these were at the same time, just by pure coincidence, they were up on billboards around the UK at like the same time. So I found a few, I went on a bit of a hunt, but I found a few where they'd be rotating through both sets. That's something that probably never happened in my life again. It was kind of crazy, but for both the BBC and Channel 4 at the same time. But it's really cool to obviously see your work at that scale and know that, so many people, no one knows who did it. It's not like your name's on it at all, but to know that, thousands of people are seeing it. I'm going to quickly break down a recent project. I know we'll get onto the Q&A soon, and you might have questions about this in particular, but a couple of years ago, it was the 80th anniversary of Smokey Bear, of course, an American icon. And they wanted to do a series of posters, each one looking at a decade. So the 50s, the 70s, and the 80s. This was there was a new advert that was like a live action advert where it's a guy in a costume, basically. And obviously there's tradition of the painted artwork. And I think they were looking for me to kind of be someone who could bridge that gap. When you work with a client like this, one thing they'll often do is they'll send you your own work. So when they've decided that when you've been kind of picked, and you might be in a short list initially, and then if you do get the work eventually, they'll often send your own work back. So I think for like, yeah, the 1950s, they were looking at this kind of stuff, which, made sense in terms of the color palette, as well as like, they basically wanted an artist who could like, they would feel like the same campaign, but each one, the idea was I lent a little bit into different techniques slightly. So the 50s is a bit more oil painting. 70s is a bit more like kind of watercolory, pastel-y, with a lot of flowers in it and things like that. And these are the kind of pieces they sent me for that one. And then the 80s was, they really wanted to have some extra characters in there. So in the portrait version, we had like 3 characters, and they kind of, obviously they're also thinking of more contemporary things like Stranger Things artwork, which is done by Kyle Lambert brilliantly. But then, they wanted like the feel of my ET piece with some of the other stuff I'd done, and the kind of the purples and blues. And then just to show you quickly on the process. So on the left, so I remember they sent me quite a detailed drawing that I felt was kind of useful to see, but I felt for me, what's important about any of this stuff is like the atmosphere. So I did this, well, I mean, it's a terrible drawing, right? But in that drawing that only took me probably 5-10 minutes, I could kind of see it in my head. I just wanted to get it down to show them, say like, this is like how I think it should sort of feel and generally be laid out. And then on the right is obviously where we finally got to. They were super helpful. So from this rough sketch, they basically cast the poster, and they would get friends and kids of, people who worked in the office to kind of come and pose in the office. They'd have a little light in the middle, which would help with lighting reference, all that stuff. So that was really cool. Same, so a really rough sketch for that 70s one, just like get all the elements in there, and then you figure it out, and then you iterate on it, and then you gradually get there. So let's quick look at some of the reference pictures they would then send based on my sketch. And then, that leads to being able to kind of put it all together. 80s one, yeah, like really rough, just, I have specific notes on what they should be holding and what they should, and I would just I wanted to feel like a nice, happy sort of situation. So I would just quickly sketch that kind of like that campfire scene. And then again, they would find people, kind of cast it. And then I would get some really great reference to work from, which A, saved me time, but I think led to, much better. I could have made it all up, but I feel like this gives you a more authentic feel. Also, lots of different layouts to consider. So when I would be doing my kind of like line art, I'd be looking at something like this. So I've got the very wide landscape, the narrow portrait, and then one that's in between. So I had to make sure that my canvases were going to cover all of that. And then by the end, you end up with these 4 different layouts that are kind of technically just crops of, the big thing. There's the landscape ones there. And then, amazing to then later on see, though, like, as I say, the Channel 4 stuff was mostly like digital billboards, but it was really cool to see that these actually made it to be physical billboards. The only thing about it was, because it's technically like a charity, they couldn't be specific about where they were going to be. So it's just a case of looking on the internet and seeing that, these guys had like taken a picture, so I got to see it. But yeah, movie posters don't have to be for movies. So I recently worked with Nike, who, well, through an advertising agency, and they'd seen my movie poster work. Nike wanted to kind of do a movie poster that wasn't a movie, so it was really nice to bring that to bear on that. Again, a similar thing, different layout. So you're kind of thinking of the movie poster like your kind of one sheet, and then you've got your landscape version. The new boots were coming out. They were very detailed. It took a long time to paint those. But then, yeah, that was then used on the Nike website. It was really cool to see that all coming together. And then it was used on social media. Now, on something like this, it's rare that you're going to be tagged or anything, but it's to be able to like work as a commercial illustrator on, this is the kind of project that I almost didn't want to dream about doing this kind of thing, because it feels too kind of like, if you hope to do it and it never happened, you might feel depressed. But to have got to do it, even though it was unexpected, was really great. And then other stuff like, again, like this kind of fake movie posters for an advert for a soft drink, a famous Scottish soft drink. And they did a Wild West movie. So In this case, I'm kind of leaning a bit more into that 50s kind of style of the painting. It's a little bit looser than I actually normally do. And then working for other clients, and again, like, just having fun making movie posters and doing my kind of detailed character work and working out the layout of everything. So yeah, what have I learned over the years? Well, being a freelance can often be tough. So this is like Bob Ross again. This is what you might imagine it could be like, what you hope it's going to be like. The reality is there's lots of things going on. So you could be sending a sketch to client 1, you could be chasing an invoice for client 3, amending a quote for client 4, sending final art to client 2. Then you got a call with your agent about a job that's kind of hovering in the air that you might get that you don't even get. So it can feel like this side of things is taking over, and but you got to always keep in your mind you're trying to get to that point where you're back at the canvas, as it were. And then you're trying to switch it back. So you're mostly being a painter, and of course you have to like keep on top of the admin stuff as well. And gradually you're in that kind of happy space as Bob Ross would always get to. But it's always good to make the thing. So I've been fortunate to work with some great clients. Whenever I can, whenever I do have chance, I love to make kind of fan art. I'm still a fan of all these things. It's amazing to do official artwork, but I just want to make the stuff anyway. So these are all pieces that I did over the last year that were just for things that were coming out that I wanted to kind of make something for. Making the thing already is all you got to do, because I've had, this can lead to client work. One of the best things is when you've done a fan art piece or a personal piece. That's one of the things that a client sends you when they hire you because they really loved it. That's the moment we know is kind of worth doing it. So the point is, you never know, but it's always worth making the thing. Inspirational quote alert. And then we're almost wrapping up here, I promise. So yeah, you probably know this one, but you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And that's sort of going back to that kind of fan art thing. If you're not getting the work that you want to be getting paid to do, it's always worth doing it for yourself anyway. Now, it's hard to find the time, of course, around life in general. But if you can kind of eke out those little bits of time to work on something personal, that really can be the thing that you will end up getting paid to do eventually. So yeah, make the things that you'd like to get paid to make. Sometimes early on, if you've got say you've been hired by a really great client, but for whatever reason, the piece, you don't feel it reflects you. I always think like, if a client was going to call you today, would you be interested to make that thing again? If they said, I love what you did on this, would you do it? And if the answer to that is no, even keep that client in your client list, but remove that piece from your portfolio, because you want to have things that you would like be happy to do again, if that makes sense. Generally speaking, clients want you to do the thing you've already done. So you have to build up your own personal work where you've got more kind of inspiration for them to choose from, if that makes sense. So yeah, these are the things that have all in one way or another led to something for me. And then share the things you've made. So, social media, I don't need to really go into it too much now, but, I've got a private Facebook group, trying to use LinkedIn. I try and build my network up. And, that's where I connected with Steve and everything in the first place. Instagram, of course, it is just something that we have to do as well as doing the work. You want to get it out there. Don't worry about sharing the same thing you shared again. Try and give it a different context, like try and share a piece, see how it overlaps with other things and share a few together. There's always a new angle you can do, but don't worry about it, because the fact is the people who saw it last time you posted it might not see it this time, and someone new might discover it. You never know who might see it this time. Don't rely on social media alone. I try and make a point of updating my portfolio as often as possible. My one is built on fabric.io. Whilst it's true I used to be a web designer myself, and if anyone's got that time to do their own template and do their own design, then great. I just like to use something that's already out there, where I can just upload my work and move on. That's how I kind of work these days. Like you guys are all doing with this, make friends with people doing similar things. If you could set up a social media collective where you're all sharing each other's work to help it get the reach a bit further and things like that. But most importantly, enjoy making things. That's really what it comes down to. That's all I've ever done. And, you know, I've been lucky to get paid to do it, but I do feel like I would still be doing it if I wasn't. Obviously, I'll be thinking around another job. I'm lucky that it's my job, but making things is where the joy is at, because I always feel like once I've done the admin and all that stuff, my job is actually to meditate. Like if you've done a sketch and you know what you're doing, you are just there, happily painting away again, like Bob Ross. So there we go. I will stop sharing, but thanks for listening to all of that.
Very cool, Sam. Your work is amazing, and there's so much of it. It's so cool to see it all and to hear your thoughts about how it came to be and what happened with client projects. You got a lot. I don't know. I'm sure you couldn't keep up with the chat, but you had a lot of.
No.
Yeah, you had a lot.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, I don't expect you to. I'm just letting you know. There's a lot of
Oh,
compliments in there. I can always get you the chat info later. Blake
Yeah.
said, so I'm sure people have questions. But
Yeah.
Blake had one question about equipment and then another kind of block. So Blake, and I'm sorry, I missed you in the intro. Anyone who talks before the intros, I might forget to give an intro. But Blake, can you jump in and ask what you had asked in there?
Yeah. So I was kind of curious on what your giant tablet thing was, whether it was like a Wacom or
Oh yeah. It's kind of next to me here, but it's a Wacom Cintiq, and it's a 24 HD. So there's an even bigger one, which is like 32. I have tried that. I found that to be like too much, because the thing is as well, like iPad is great, but the thing you don't have in an iPad is like you need one of those like frame things, which I actually haven't got. It's like the elbow, resting the elbow is really crucial to drawing. This 24-inch Cintiq really like is like the perfect amount, whereas the 32, once you go that big, it just means you end up having to like zoom out of the work anyway, because otherwise your gestures are so big and it takes you so much longer. So I've just found that 24 is the sweet spot where you've got your painting, you've got enough of your interface around, but also you're resting your elbow.
okay, fair enough. And then also too, I know I thought I heard you mention it right after I commented that you have an agent, and I was kind of curious about like whether it was before you had an agent or even like currently even outside your agent, how you go about getting new clients other than just word of mouth.
Well, it really varies. But yeah, I mean, certainly, I mean, having an agent has been great, but equally, they brought me some decent projects in, but equally, there's most of the stuff probably still is things that I do directly. So the way I think of an agent is like it's great to have one, and if you haven't got one, it's worth building up a body of work and every now and again trying to kind of get an agent, because they can definitely really help. But yeah, for me, it's like I don't know. I try and be good about using LinkedIn, and also once you've like then worked with clients, I try and make sure I'm contacting them from time to time, like without bugging them. But basically, when I've got new stuff to share, I want to be getting in touch with those clients again, and like, just like you're trying to stay in those clients' minds, and you just so that when there is something that you could be doing, that they're going to think of you. It's a tough balance. The challenging part I find is like when you're busy, but when you're coming to the end of a thing, that's when you're kind of most busy. But that's also the time when you need to be starting to put the feelers out for new stuff. Because if you don't do that, what happens is you finish this big project, you make the deadline, that's great. But then the risk is as a freelancer, then that's when you kind of go quiet, when you don't want to be. I mean, you might want a holiday after a big project, but ideally you want that next thing to be coming in. So over the years, I've tried to get better at, yes, like I know I'm busy on this big thing, but in 2 weeks' time, that'll be done. So now is the time I need to be like, say, hey, to like clients I haven't worked with for a few years and putting some feelers out.
And then also too, just like one other quick like question on top of that is about how many projects would you say that you're like balancing at one time, or are you just one thing at a time type guy?
I would love to be one thing type, one project at a time. Actually, I say that. That's not true. The truth is I like having several projects on. in a sort of in a perfect world, you would have like one big client project that's going to pay the bills for a few months, whatever, and then you can kind of fit in side projects of your own, like personal work. The reality, what happens as a freelance, or for me anyway, is like I may or may not have like a bigger project on, but I might get offered something that's kind of smaller but would be fun to do, such as like a DVD cover for a kung fu movie. I always love to do them. So I will tend to kind of say yes to those things. And because from a cash flow point of view, you also just never know. Like I would rather have like a few little things going on as well as a bigger thing, just because like the smaller thing might be done faster, then I can invoice that and get paid for that in a couple of weeks, hopefully, where I'm still working on the bigger thing. And just from a creative point of view as well, what I've found is if you're just on one thing all the time, like one painting or whatever it is, one client job, you're never getting a fresh look at it. Whereas I find if I kind of hop away and do another thing for a couple of hours, in theory, I should, yeah, be working on the big thing. But actually, when you take that break and then you come back, then you've got that fresh look at it. So it's almost like, oh, you suddenly see things in it that you hadn't recognized because you were just painting away. So I've loved to sort of like, yeah, over time, it's like actually, obviously there's you can get to a point where there's too much going on, but having two or three, I guess, was kind of my sweet spot. One bigger thing, a couple of smaller things. But as a freelancer, I never know. Like something might come in, or an old project might come back that something needs to be updated. So that's just how it goes, you know.
Yeah, thank you so much. Those are all really great answers.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Blake. Thank you, Sam. Ben has his hand up. Ben, jump in.
Yeah, thanks for sharing.
Hey, Ben.
Kind of touched upon it through a lot of different examples. It was kind of like your inspiration. You had a lot of different examples, like other poster artists, like Christian and even like fine art. I don't know if there was any other types of things, maybe unconventional, that have inspired you. And then also in terms of how that affects what you do, like you do have like a kind of distinct style. Is that something you find you put into it intentionally, or is that more like, oh, it's kind of emerged based on your taste, your style in your work?
Yeah, that's a great question. In terms of unusual kind of inspiration, I don't know. Like, I think in a way, my tastes are probably quite conventional, like in the sense that, you know, I like Drew Streesen's work because I love seeing like my favorite characters from Star Wars, Indiana Jones, rendered really nicely, and I just love that interpretation of, you know, what's on the big screen. And then I just loved big, colorful paintings. So I think it's just like, I think it's almost like the pop culture love came first. So then the kind of fine art stuff that I end up liking, like David Hockney, I could see the kind of bridge between those two things. It's like generally like a colorful palette, and, you know, and I suppose I've just been in that Venn diagram of like overlapping those two. But I often equate it to like when you're earlier on in your career, you're trying lots of different things. And you kind of, I think it's like being in a band. Like when you start a band, you're typically going to play cover versions, right? So you're going to play other people's songs, and then through that you kind of find your own way of working, and then you might write your own songs. And I feel like art's did the same as that. And, you know, I'm now 20 years in, so I often see other art styles and I'm like, oh, well, that's so cool. Like, you know, in a way, there's a bit of you that's like, oh, I wish I worked in that way. But then it comes down to the fact that you've evolved this thing over time, and it's kind of become your, like, I no longer have to think about it, as it were, but equally you get to a place where you're kind of happy with it. And it's just, like I say, it's like when the client has agreed to the sketch and you know what you're doing, you are just like meditating. So I feel like that's kind of why I love it so much. And that is to me why it's still like what it was like as a kid, where you would just, it's a rainy afternoon, you just, you know, get the drawings out and just do sketch away. What I love about it is like, you know, that is still what I feel like my job is.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
I mean, is there any maybe aesthetics or styles that you haven't really tried a lot that you'd like to?
Oh, sure. I mean, well, it's also like, well, partly that, but partly things I would love to do. I've never really done any airbrushing, and obviously that's something that Drew Struzan used quite a bit in his work. I've never used an airbrush. I've only ever used like paints. But from time to time, I get back to doing a little bit of painting, and I would love to be doing more of that. So it's that weird thing of like, I'm so lucky to do this for my job. But as a result of that, you're being hired to do things, many of which are in that kind of like that sweet spot where I'd love to be doing it anyway. But as an artist, there's always things you want to be doing. Like sometimes I would just see, take a nice photo in the park, and part of me wants to be a landscape painter. So you're always kind of being torn of like, oh, I'd love to try getting my inks out again and doing some kind of dry brush type stuff with the ink. So, it's just a case of you just kind of got to fit in what you can. And you never know though, when like a fun little personal piece that you do could just take you down a little kind of tangent where that becomes maybe something that you incorporate into some work later.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Sam. A couple more questions already lined up. Corey, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in. I was just going to type this up, but then I figured I got to ask you, Sam. So one of the things I found getting into key art and branding is the pace and speed often demanded to deliver. I saw you did some initial sketches. What I'm thinking is about what advice would you give somebody who wants to get into this work, do what you do? What technical skills would you say are the most foundational in being able to support that in the demand? I'm talking like, a week to do, something rendered, at least what I found, it's been very, very quick. And, I'm in the process of refining and dusting off those old art school skills. So I'm just curious, however way you want to tackle that question.
No, that's a great question. I mean, what you find is, and this is all to do with like how many projects you might have on at a given time, is you basically, in many ways, like the things I dreamed of doing have come true, and that, I'm always grateful for that. But the reality is also that you never, in my experience, get as much time as you would hope to do any of those things. So, and often some of the kind of bigger and cooler jobs tend to be the ones that, I don't know why this is, but it may be because, like, say an advertising studio has been considering other people, and like, if you finally get to be the one, that's awesome. But it often means that whatever timeline, it's very rare that the timeline gets extended for you as the artist. Yeah. And it tends to be however less well organized the agency has been or whatever, it doesn't help you because it doesn't move along. So you get less and less time. So the thing you learn quite quickly is, obviously you're trying to make artwork that you're proud of for every single project. And, generally speaking, I'd like to think I get to that point, but you also come up quickly against the fact that you have to deal quickly with feedback, sometimes from like multiple stakeholders who'll have, they want to say something about your work, and then you've got to incorporate that and figure it out. So you learn to kind of like, making artwork is very personal, but you also have to develop a thick skin so that you can like not take it personally. One of the coolest things that happens though is like, say, what I love to do is if a client gives you feedback about something you're working on and you kind of disagree, if you can like find a way to see what they're seeing is wrong with it, but fix it in a way that still feels true to what you want to do, that's then the kind of sweet spot. So, but generally speaking, I love doing client work because you get to go and say it like this. You might go on an agency call with lots of different stakeholders and you're having a chat about the work. One of the best things I always think, like, if any of the feedback can help make the artwork or the project better, then I would always love to hear that. So, whereas I think early on, it's like, you almost want to be like, I did this drawing, here it is, I made this, that's what it is, and, deal with it. Now, some of the best stuff I think that I do, like Smokey Bear was a big one where there were several agencies involved. To make something that feels more like a collaboration, you're the person bringing it to life, but it's sort of like everyone is like going towards that same goal. And it's not always like that. Sometimes you get, horrible feedback and you really can't work out how to deal with it. But most of the time, most people are open to having a conversation. Yeah. And that's kind of fun. Cool.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. Scott has his hand raised.
Just talking about the feedback. What happens with you when you get negative feedback? Do you try to get better and fix the stuff that you don't like, or do you just push through it and try your best?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the project, but I've had weird things with even things like DVD covers where if you watch a movie, like the hierarchy of like the relative scale of characters is to do with like how much they're in the movie, right? Like who's the protagonist, the antagonist, secondary characters, tertiary characters. I mean, it's kind of maybe sometimes my own fault for wanting to put everyone in it, right? But anyway, I've had things come back where my composition has definitely worked, but then there's been a contractual obligation where an actress and an actor need to be exactly the same size, like their faces, things like that. So things like that, it's just like, well, if you want to do this project, you've kind of just got to do it. You've just got to make that work. So again, I guess there's been times where some, feedback has like upset me to some extent, but it's more like the frustration of like, I want the client to be happy as well as me. And the challenge sometimes is making sure that everyone is happy. I'd like to think that 9 times out of 100, maybe as many times as possible, I'll get to that point. Also, making any kind of artwork, I don't know if anyone else feels that has this experience, but for me, it's like you have the initial inspiration of like, I've got this awesome sketch that I really like. The client likes it. You go and do it, and then making the actual painting is really, really difficult. It's only when you get to the very, very end of the process where you're putting in those final brushstrokes and you really feel like it's come together and you finally are like ready to like almost like make peace with it. Like it's not gone exactly the way that you had in your head. But you're happy with it. And then when you're getting excited about the next thing, you can then move on and park that kind of one. You finally let it go. But that can be very intense at the time. I don't know if that really answered your question.
Yeah, that does. During the times when you create something you want, but it's not with your mind, do you take breaks for yourself to get yourself back up to the level you feel like you need to be?
I mean, I try and have a quite a good sort of in case this is an interesting one, I'll just give you like my sort of daily routine very quickly, which is like, so I've got wife and 2 children. My children are 13 and 10. So obviously, both busy at school, both have like lots of after school clubs and various things. So my routine is I generally get up between 6 and 6:30. I do an hour in the morning then I come in and then I would get the kids ready for school, make their packed lunches, all that kind of stuff, get them off to school. I sometimes go for a jog, sometimes for a walk, sometimes come back to work, sometimes play a bit of tennis with a friend, but like I have that kind of, then I'm typically back at work at 10. So what I find is that 6 till 7:30 in the morning, it sort of feels like, oh, you're starting early. But actually for me, it's just like, if I'm doing something at that time, I'm just doing something I don't have to think about. So it's like a painting I'm halfway through. I just pick it up, load that file, go. And it's amazing how much you can get done in that really focused time. Then I'm sort of having a break, having breakfast, having coffee. Then when I'm back at 10, then I'm working like 10 till 1 for lunch. And then, the kids finishing school between 3 and 4. Then they've got after school clubs. So I probably work 10 until 4. And then I might do a bit more in the evening, like between 8 and 10. But it just depends. But I try and have good breaks. And there's been times where it's almost been like a bit frustrating to have that school routine, but actually a bit like taking the break from an individual piece of artwork, doing that just keeps, you've got less time than you would like, but you then end up being more efficient. And I think as a father now, I'm probably more efficient than I ever was before I had kids, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. I was going to say, how's your back and your neck? Because mine always hurts. Do you feel pain? Do you have to do any stretching to keep in shape?
Luckily not yet. I've not had RSI or anything like that, but I'm sure it's, I'm getting older. It's going to get harder from a physical point of view. I don't, I can't sort of deny that. but I do try to sort of I try and make sure I'm doing exercise a few times a week. And the fact is, going out for a walk, I don't mean it's like got to go on a 10-mile run or anything, but those are often the times when you figure those creative problems out, where something you were stuck on, just the act of walking away, doing something different. It could be video gaming, it doesn't have to be exercise, but just something different. That's when your subconscious mind will solve that problem. Then you come back and it's like, oh yeah, why didn't I see that before? Oh, also, I would say my wife is like, my biggest supporter, but also my harshest critic. I'll show her what I'm doing. She'll be like, no, that, whether that guy looks wrong, I'm not sure that's working, so she's always, she's there to tear it down when it needs to be. And that can be hard to take sometimes, but I also, she's always right. And, I know it. So, a lot of it is just then coming to terms with that and saying, but again, it's like the client, same as the clients in a way. My wife is like another client, but the fact is, if someone contributes to your artwork and can make it better, then, in the end, like, that's a nice feeling when you realize that. And sometimes it takes someone else. It's either takes you taking a break to see it, but anytime you are able to share something with like a colleague or a friend, even someone who's not in the space, it can really help a lot. So I would definitely say, seek peer review when you can, for sure.
Good advice. And it's nice when they live with you too.
Yeah.
All right, we got a few more already lined up. Luke, why don't you jump in?
Hello. Yeah, a lot of great advice. Appreciate that. Just a quick one. Do all of your clients come to you, or do you have a different percentage of people that you may have to reach out yourself?
It really varies, but I'd say it's sort of, I'll get a few things come from my agent. And what's amazing about having an agent is like, there's kind of someone in the background who, not that they're like looking for work for you every single second, but just someone who's there to like bring things your way from time to time. And also someone who's going to negotiate on your behalf. So definitely the most kind of lucrative stuff I've done financially has typically been coming from my agent. So even though they're taking a percentage, they take a percentage, but they're also going to negotiate often a better rate for something. So that's cool. But but also, in fact, for years I was trying to get an agent and couldn't. And it was only really when I'd sort of started to do more work with a few bigger clients directly, because I think what most agents want to see is it's not just about the style of your work, it's also wanting to see that you've done some stuff off your own in your own terms. So they're really, what an agent is typically doing is kind of seeing, does this artist have like commercial potential? And if you've already got a proven track record where you've kind of got some decent clients like yourself, then that's going to help you to get the agent, which will then hopefully take you to another level. I try and make sure I stay in touch with clients, and I every now and again, it might only be twice a year, but I will say, hey, I've done some new stuff, check out my portfolio. And ideally I'm trying to do that as I'm coming to the end of some bigger projects, but it doesn't always work like that. And sometimes things getting a bit quiet, and then that's when you kind of got to get the feelers out.
Thank you very much. Got one other question. You've worked across quite a range of like different genres. So you've done a bit of gaming, you've done a bit of film, a bit of music. Would you say working with different clients in different industries differ in any way?
I don't know. Like in the end, it's just all about, all of the stuff I'm doing is trying to, I guess, celebrate a given thing in one way or another. So I'm trying to bring the same. But I would also say, so there's certain things that I grew up loving, whether it's Star Wars, Spider-Man. What I try and make sure that I do is like that sort of passion that I have for those things. They're things that I don't necessarily know as much about or am into as much. And I would include sport in that. But I always think like you're always trying to make something for the person who's as big a fan as that thing as you are of Star Wars or whatever. So I try and always bring that energy to the thing, and through doing that, you kind of like, you're going to learn about the subject, you research it. But being a commercial illustrator is like, you've kind of, I'm basically making fan art, and if I'm lucky, it's for stuff that I'm a fan of. But if I'm not, my goal is to become a fan of the thing, either before I start or certainly during it. But not massive differences. But I mean, I will say that I've done some stuff for like football more recently, which has been really fun. But it's tended to be that those are much slower paced,
Right.
than say some of the sort of DVD covers I've done and things like that. Which is a bit weird because where like kits are often changing from season to seasons, obviously.
Yeah.
And there's been things I've done that haven't ended up being released for reasons like that, where the artwork has been approved, but by the time it's kind of actually ready to come out, then it's like season's over, and they've moved on. So that's definitely been an issue. But it really varies so much from client to client, not necessarily across. You can have good and bad clients in every single bit of it. So
Thank you very much.
thanks, Luke.
Thanks, Luke. Andrew K.
Yes, Sam. I was curious on your thoughts in regards to movies and movie posters. This trend in the past, it feels like 10 plus years, 20 plus years, where I think, especially in mainstream, let's call them mainstream movies, or like movies with like big IPs or intellectual properties or things that are already in kind of like big franchises or clearly want to be in big franchises. So, i.e., like more modern Star Wars films, Marvel films. There's this trend of what they call like, I think they call it like the floating pyramid syndrome, or like it's exactly what it sounds like. It's all like the main characters, more so probably the main actors, like with their heads cut out, and they're kind of like in this like pyramid formation. It feels like every time I'm online, and I know the online space that I'm in is probably not like the public opinion necessarily, but like I always see like the cool like alternative versions of posters where people make like things more artsy or more like highbrow. I'm assuming this option that's out in the world is because of like agents on the actor side, where they say, we don't want like some artsy BS. We want our actor that we're selling for this amount of money, and we want them to be in a bunch of other movies. But do you see any chance of like, just like, since you're like your finger is more on the pulse of the industry,
I'll tell you about
your
that.
work and like Druzan's work, this like painted feel, is there any chance of like any amount of like reverting back a bit and like having these more like painterly or like highbrow or like more interesting like key art movie art posters?
Well, I feel like there's kind of two prongs to that. One is in terms of like, so to me, I love the genre of floating heads posters, in the sense that to me that kind of comes from like the Drew Struzan kind of era, where and as an artist, I just really enjoy solving that puzzle of that hierarchy of where everyone goes and where they're looking and how you bring it all together. So I sort of, I know that there's plenty of people out there who really don't like that genre, as it were, but that's kind of, I've kind of explored that space, both within movie posters, and then it's allowed me to do some commercial work, whether it's for football or advertising, kind of using those kind of techniques outside of it, because we all understand that as at a glance, like a movie poster. I mean, I'd love to see creative interpretations, and sometimes for some of the gallery shows I've done something more unusual, and things like that. But I think what's basically happened is then, I mean, one of the reasons like Drew Struzan ended up retiring was because then, Photoshop was then coming along, and what basically advertising agencies were then doing was trying to take the techniques of like a painter, but when you have all the photography, you can have amazing photography, but unless it's gone through like a painter's like interpretation, it can feel like a bit of a distracting kind of collage. And then obviously, yeah, the pressure comes to add this and this and this and this and add this element, this person. And yeah, like you say, like this actor's got to be as big as that actor, and all those issues kind of come out of it. But there are examples of, if you think back to, the fact that you have to think back, I guess, is not great. But like, say, like Baby Driver, that had amazing artwork by, I don't forget his name now. Can't think of it off the top of my head, but like that was a collage style, poster for a campaign for a movie that was also illustrated. And apparently that came out because one of the execs, like at Sony, was a big kind of movie poster collector, and they knew that Rory Kurtz is who it's by. They knew that artist's work, and then he got that gig. You look at someone like Matt Ferguson, who's done a lot of official sort of where they're re-releasing the Star Wars movies, like Revenge of the Sith, and he's gotten to do like official artwork for that. So I feel like there's kind of, I always say, rising tide, it raises all ships and all that kind of thing. So I think there are, yes, it'd be great if there are more examples where an illustrator is being hired over just having like a photo montage, because I think that can elevate it anyway. But I just think we've all just got to keep pushing, and anytime you see anything that's illustrated, that's that's a positive, that's a step forward. But like I say, I don't really try. I just like doing, even if it's uncool and it's not as clever and kind of like conceptual as other things might be. Even though I love to see that stuff, the fact is, I just like doing a detailed portrait of a character or a scene and working out how it all kind of fits together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And I think you're right in the sense that like I'm probably misinterpreting or misrepresenting. Like, I don't think every like quote unquote what do I call it, like a face collage or face pyramid is bad. Like the Baby Driver one is phenomenal, and I have some good ones. I think I'm like having a bias because it's like when I see like a just okay one or one that looks like someone threw this together in Photoshop and it kind of just fit the bill and there was no like artistic value like really imposed into it. I'm like, that really sticks with me.
True. Yeah, no, it's interesting. Like, I think with a lot of it, it's like if a painter was involved during the process, then maybe the composition would just be a bit tidier and somehow. And the fact is, because you can do anything in Photoshop, the temptation is to add and add and add. And what I'm going for, I guess, is I want to often get a lot of the characters in, but it's trying to work out that composition that will like, lead the viewer around it all. But I think back to like that era, like that kind of 80s era of posters, that was before, you'd be lucky if you saw a trailer, for instance. So that poster had to act as a trailer. So the reason why it's got that montage of lots of things happening and lots of people is because, they're the things that you would have seen. You're not going to see in that trailer that's going to like rip through all the like iconic things. So, that's why I always think like, and also the fact is, anyone making that kind of stuff now for fan art or whatever, all the references that you're going to use are already kind of out there. Whereas again, back in the day, like someone like Drew Struzan will be one of the only people who's given all that photography to work from. He's literally got those in his studio as opposed to Googling it. And, so now there's a lot of people obviously making the same thing. And I would say to anyone, like, I love making movie posters. That's kind of like my favorite thing to do. But what I've been really tried hard to do is like try and use that in other areas. So getting to do that kind of thing, but in sport, for instance, I feel there's lots of amazing artists who I would say, if you only want to do the movie poster work, is a small market really, and if you want to be doing commercial stuff, you need to be thinking about other areas that there might be a commercial aspect to it. So I'm lucky that I can take my love for the movie poster style and do it for other things from time to time.
Yeah, thank you very much. Great points. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thanks, Andrew. Ben, you put your hand out. Do you still have a question?
Yeah, it was, I guess, what are your thoughts on AI in general? Both, I guess, the ethics of it, and then I know in graphic design, then maybe marketing more broadly, there's a lot of mixed things. Like for, let's say, coding, it's totally accepted, I think, for a lot of people. But I know for art, I've played with those tools, but I've never put something like AI generated like imagery out, because I just feel like I'm not sure how they made those things, and it's not really what I want to see. I don't know if you have thoughts about AI.
Oh man, so many thoughts, but I'll try and yeah. I mean, for me, it's like as for many artists, it's massively kind of triggering, really. I But equally, for anyone who isn't an illustrator, I understand why there's like a novelty factor to it that people have like kind of used. People who like we're never going to hire an artist to do their portrait, for instance, and they're just kind of like seeing what it looks like, and there's a sort of a fun factor. And it's easy to be an artist and kind of get on a high horse about that, and I try not to, because I get that that's a different. It's a different thing. I mean, I've seen people who are purporting to be artists, but really they're using AI. But equally, I don't want to be. You got to be really careful, like about, because you can suspect that that's what someone's doing, but then you got to think twice before you call anyone out. And the fact is that any work that I do now, if a client shares it, you'll and especially if the artist isn't tagged in like a social media thing, you'll inevitably get, because no one. This is the point. The reason I hate it so much is like no one knows what they're looking at. So everyone's work has just been stolen without permission. And of course, the computer can look at all the work that's ever been done and sort of like blurb out a sort of like a rough interpretation of it, and or change it to any style that's ever been done and all that stuff. But it's tough because I don't know, like I'm at a point I like to think in my career where I've established some kind of my style already exists. I'm not like famous or anything to the point where anyone's going to be by sort of putting my style into AI is going to make any money from it, as it were, like some kind of amazing like alternative thing that I do. But I imagine it's far tougher starting out to try and to get yourself out there, because but this is me, but then to bring it around to be positive. So I think what's happening is, whereas some clients have got excited about the prospect of using it and jumped on that kind of bandwagon. And what's happening is, anytime you see something that really is AI, there's just a massive backlash against it in terms of the comments. So I can't see that any brand can really. So I think what we'll start to see, and are starting to see, is brands will be more obviously working with artists. So in those advertising campaigns where the artist has not been like tagged on social media, I think it's going to turn around where brands are going to be wanting to be working with artists. And yeah, we might have to record our process more to show that we really did it and all that stuff. And it's in a way a shame that we should have to do that. But equally, why not use our smartphones and whatever to document that process? And then we've got some extra content we can share. And yes, we shouldn't be having to prove that we did it. But equally, that's just where we're at. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm purely against it just from an environmental point of view. Anyway, creatively, I'm pretty severe, I guess, in the sense that if I'm following someone who shares anything that's an AI generated image, I would just immediately unfollow. I just do that for my own sort of sanity. So I don't know. It's a big one. But I would just come back to, like, anyone trying to make art, is you have to, as hard as it is to be frustrated by that, as we all can be. And, if some people are just happily trying it and whatever, like, that's up to them. Like I said, I understand that it can be a sort of, it's like doing a Google search for something that doesn't exist, I guess. And then something is coming back, whereas once upon a time it wouldn't have done, I guess. But I am, also, seeing like, say like Adobe bringing all this stuff into their apps, and like I find that very strange, I'll be honest. But my background is in painting and drawing. So I've always like tried to, I've enjoyed utilizing technology. Like I work in Photoshop, I work in layers. I like being able to undo mistakes, but I've never used anything, and I never will use anything that will do something for me automatically. Just one last thing on this is also the best part about the job is I would never want to skip the part, like the terror of having a blank canvas, right? I would never want to skip that, because to me the satisfying part of it is when you figure out what you're doing and then you go from nothing to something. If you kind of were using a prompt to kind of skip that phase or to sort of see what ideas might come, I just feel like that's just, you're only going to remix something you've already done if you're working that way. And maybe I'll never think of anything original ever again, but I'd rather be working in that way, and just live with that, than sort of trying to use a machine to, I don't know, trying to do some kind of shortcut.
And I can add a little bit to that. Our last guest, Chiara Verchese, who is an editorial illustrator specializing in science and medicine, a lot of magazines. She said that she has been commissioned recently, more frequently, to do those kind of process pieces and interviews, and literally commissioned. So she's actually getting paid to do the illustration for the publication, and then she's getting paid to do the piece where she's interviewed and she shares her process. So
yeah,
nothing bad about that, right? She's getting paid.
Absolutely, yeah.
And she sees that same trend where she said it is like a flex on the part of the publication to say we work with and pay human beings. So positive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We have a couple more minutes. I had a question. So we didn't really talk about money, Sam. I don't know. You may not want to get so specific, but let's say like somebody starting out in the industry, what might they expect? What kind of projects might they expect to get when they're starting out? And not literally starting out. They've done a lot of strong work and they have a decent portfolio, and now they're making those first steps into getting paid for it. What kind of clients, what kind of projects, and what kind of prices might they expect per project?
Great question. I mean, I think it's just about, if I think back to when I was kind of starting out, are there, it could be as small as like, is there a local band that you really like who, maybe you could, the fact is, I think there's no harm early on in, potentially working with clients where, you really like what they're doing. So you can offer, basically do some work to get a portfolio piece. I think, I've done all of that stuff, and I think that's totally fine, because anything you do, and yes, it's nicer to get paid, but you never know when the thing you're doing that is going to get seen by somebody. So if you've, say it's a band, say you can, get a few $100s or something to do something for them. I mean, that's another issue about the whole AI thing, where there's been, a lot of those kind of, a lot of that work has kind of gone away, where the band is just going to, get an AI cover. But again, hopefully, or what's inevitably going to happen, there'll be a backlash to that, and then maybe they're going to look for artists. So I feel like reaching out to people is the important thing. And, reach out to the big clients as well as the small ones. But early on, you're going to be more likely to work for the smaller ones. But in terms of say the Blu-ray covers and things, I've been lucky enough to work on, say, like a Spider-Man cover, and that's going to be at the higher end. But, when you're doing a 1970s Hong Kong Kung Fu movie, that's going to be at the lower end. So those are passion projects. What I'm always trying to do is obviously you need the projects that are going to pay the bills. But then you have to weigh up, how much do I want this piece in my portfolio? And obviously it's just always trying to weigh it up. And I also think about, you have to consider, where is the client? Is the client going to make any money off the thing that you're doing? So then when I work with my agent, if I'm doing, in the case of an advertising campaign, the whole point is that selling a product, right? So then you're going to get paid. What happens with that kind of work is you're paid for your time. So you've kind of often got a day rate, but then you're going to have the usage fee, which is how long does that client get to use that work, and where can they use it? And is it on social media? Is it in print? So that's when you're going to get 10, 20%, 30%, 40% on top of what you're doing. So they're obviously the great projects to get. So yeah, I always think of it like, I love to do this stuff, and it'd be amazing if it all paid brilliantly, but it doesn't. And I'd still 9 times out of 10 would rather do the thing and have another piece that I've, tested myself, try something a bit different. And the fact is, if a client is paying less, you're getting a few $100s rather than a few thousand, then I feel like you can put your foot down a bit more, as it were, and you can be more like, right, well, this is what I can do for that money. And that's the other thing as well. So sometimes a client may say, well, I want you to do this, 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 and this, and this. And then you'll ask what the budget is, and they'll say, whatever, say it's $1,000. And that's really too low for all the things they wanted. So that's when that problem solving comes in, where I will go back and say, well, okay, let's say if your budget really isn't 1,000, well, look, if you could extend it to whatever, 1,500, then I could do a couple of extra things. But if that's where we're fixed, then I would recommend doing this. And the fact is, like, doing something simpler can often be good. So again, it's just like, I would rather do the gig, but negotiate either in terms of like persuading the client to pay more for what they want, or suggesting something that's more ambitious than they thought, but then they really like your idea, so they're going to give you more money. Or you say, well, if you've only got this, I will do less for you, but there's no reason why that still can't. It's, quality over quantity, basically.
Less faces or crowd shot or something like that.
Yeah, no, exactly. It could literally be like, well, I would love to include like the tertiary characters in this movie, but what you're saying the budget is for, I'm only going to do the secondary characters as well as the primary ones. So, there's all that. So I really like to turn work down, because I feel like if someone likes your work and they want to hire you, then your job is also to negotiate that. And yes, make the most money that you can. But sometimes you have to recognize the fact that the client doesn't have a lot of money, but they're doing something like, maybe they've got a passion project and they're just hoping to use you for it. And it can be their passion project, doesn't have to be yours. But often there's like a middle ground to be met, I find, anyway.
Yeah, I was going to say, if there was an up and coming band, you like their music, they didn't have a big budget, would you do an album cover of like their portrait for £500? But it sounds like you would.
Yeah, for sure. Like, because if you like the band, then it's not like that band is going to make a ton of money off that thing necessarily. But there's a chance with that is like, what if you then if that band grows and gets bigger, but you're doing like the artwork for them, then there could be a point where, I've worked with clients where the first thing we've done has been, for not a lot, or, or less than that. And then that person comes back to you. In fact, some of the clients that I work with as a designer, I ended up getting hired as an illustrator when they had moved on to like a bigger advertising agency. So again, like it's really all about networking, I think, and the money will kind of come in bigger and smaller amounts from project to project, and you're well within your rights to sort of say no to things. But there's this smaller stuff like, I keep coming back to album covers, but it's just such a good example of like, if you are passionate about something that you can contribute to it, then, that could lead to other things. And like, in fact, like I did a gig poster for Elton John, which the pay was okay, really only a few $100s. And then I get like 50 copies of the print that I could sell. It was okay. But that led to me getting the BBC project for Glastonbury, which was far bigger. So again, as long as you're getting something for everything, it's worth it, I would say, because you just don't know who's going to see that thing, who's got the big bucks, as it were.
Right. That totally makes sense. All right, we're at time, so we're going to wrap it up here. Sam, thank you so much for your time. You're very generous with it, for your presentation and the questions that you answered. It's been great.
No, thanks everybody. Like, I felt like I've done, at this point in my career, I've done so much stuff, and there's so much I could talk about. So trying to sort of get through that presentation and then make sure we had time for the Q&A. But hopefully, you know, that's been interesting in different ways. But yeah, thanks for all for hanging around and asking questions as well. So yeah, like if anyone thinks of anything, you know, feel free to, you know, whatever, reach out to me separately and I'll, you know, try and get back to you for sure if anything comes up later. But yeah, thanks everyone for hanging out.